Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. We're on the fourth episode of the third season, and this entire season is dedicated to talking to women in law. Today, we're joined by two lawyers with very fulfilling careers on the corporate side, despite their aversion to numbers during their school days. Our first guest today is Nilofer Lam. She's a partner with ZBA and based out of Mumbai. Niloufer studied law in the UK, worked overseas for many years before consciously electing to move back to India. Welcome, Niloufer. You can switch on your camera. Thanks for being here. Niloufer is joined by Pallavi Gopinath Aney, partner at Allen and Overy, and she's based out of Singapore. Pallavi had quite the reverse journey where she studied her law in India, worked here briefly, and then moved overseas. Today, we're talking to both Pallavi and Niloufer about what it's like to work across jurisdictions, multi ethnic peer sets, and really diverse work cultures. Hi, Pallavi. Good evening.
Hi,
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Hey, Vikas.
Thanks, Tanisha. Hi, Nilofer. Hi, Pallavi.
Hello.
Welcome on board Unsuited.
Hi, Vikas.
Right. So we're going to kick off going back a few years to university times. So both, I'll start with Nilofer first. You were educated in the UK, Pallavi, you in India. Can you tell us a bit about why, one, you chose to study the law and how that law school experience was for each of you? So Nilofer, we'll go with you first.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Great to be on. Thank you for having me. So in terms of why I chose to study law, I think I kind of fell into it a little bit by accident. I had a big brother who's 11 years older than me. And he suggested it to me when I wasn't really sure what I should study at university. And I did kind of speak to him about why, but he said it's because he thought I had a logical brain. So that's down to him. Yeah, so I decided to kind of study law, and actually once I joined, I really enjoyed it. It was great. I was fortunate to be at the LSE, which is extremely international, cosmopolitan. You can even do kind of a couple of non-law electives as part of your 3-year course. So it was really a great experience, and of course lots of fun because I was in London, so there was no shortage of fun.
Yeah. When exactly were you at the LSE? What time frame?
Quite a while ago, I'd say 92 to 95.
All right, just before. Okay.
Yeah,
I started working. 99 is when I started working opposite LSE.
Okay.
Anderson's.
Good. That makes me feel younger. Great.
Pallavi, yourself, why did you choose to study the law, and how was that experience for you? During law school.
Choice of law, much like sort of Niloufer, a bit accidental. I think I believed I wasn't particularly sort of numerically literate or good with numbers. So none of the usual sort of options that were being put before me, like econ honors or commerce, none of those really sort of appealed. It was either law or sort of a liberal arts degree. And I think the time I went to law school, NLS Bangalore was still quite new. I think NALSA was in its second year. So there was a lot of buzz about sort of the 5-year program in India and how it was sort of changing the way law was being taught. And there was this sort of entire new option, which was corporate law. So it all really sounded quite sort of interesting. And much like Niloufer, because it was a mixed curriculum, the first 2 years you study history, you study a bit of political science, economics, a whole bunch of things. The curriculum really sort of appealed. So yeah, for want of, ended up writing the exam, getting in and showing up without any idea about what to expect for the next 5 years. But I have to say, I really enjoyed law school. I was always quite a sort of relatively sort of shy and reserved kid in school, but believe it or not, with quite a sort of sheltered upbringing. So law school was in some senses the first time I was living away from home. It was really quite an interesting experience. I think it was also a lesson in humility because you sort of rock up feeling really cool because you've gotten into law school. And then every second kid in this class of 80 is sort of head girl or head boy or school captain or something. And you're like, wow, I'm really thick compared to half the people in this class. So it was really, I think the first 2 years were about sort of finding my feet, about sort of what I liked about the subjects, finding good friends, living away from home. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, sort of never really looked back.
That's super. And what was the kind of diversity mix when you started, when you joined NLS?
So when I joined NLS, I think mine was the second year where there were more girls than boys. So from memory, it was about 45, 35. And I think we were the second or third class where that had happened.
Wow.
And that I think has consistently been a pattern through sort of law schools over the last sort of decade and a half. I think all international firms know that when we recruit in law schools, the classes are more heavily weighted towards girls rather than guys.
It's an interesting point. I think something we might get onto later about how that mix changes the more senior you go up in your career, actually.
Yeah.
So you both started working in, the respective jurisdictions that you studied your law in. And then you decided to mix it up and then venture overseas. So what's that experience been like? Because you study in a certain jurisdiction, you kind of pick up the work culture there, and you feel like, okay, this is going to be it. And then you go ahead and make yourself extremely uncomfortable by going off to completely foreign land and fully realigning, in terms of culture, in terms of work style, in terms of peer set, and most importantly, just like being able to live there on your own, right? And sort of function. So tell us a little bit about that. Pallavi, maybe you want to go first on this one.
Sure. For me, honestly, I only worked in India for 2 years, and I moved at the age of 25. So I don't think anything was sort of so firmly entrenched, sort of needed to change really. Also, my experience in sort of working in India, I worked with the founders of SNR, and the firm was run very much along the lines of sort of international sort of best practice in terms of training associates and so on. And both sort of Sandeep Bhagat and Rajastani were sort of very committed to sort of being very hands-on, training associates. So in that respect, when I moved overseas, it didn't actually feel very different. I think what felt different was more, obviously, the mix of lawyers. It was a much more multicultural sort of environment in Singapore. But it was actually a lot of fun at 25. I mean, also for the Singapore market, that was a relatively sort of foreign firms were quite young here compared to sort of where we are today. So the offices used to be a mix of sort of, young sort of expat lawyers from everywhere. So we had people from Australia, the UK, India, Singapore. And it was actually a lot of fun. I mean, we worked very hard, we played hard, but it was also very busy markets right before sort of Lehman Brothers happens around 2006 to, I can see Niloufer nodding, 2008. I mean, it was just regular to do 18, sort of 20 hours in the office. But it was culturally a lot, sort of a really nice mix. And I certainly had a lot of fun with that sort of move. And Singapore as a city was great. I mean, I think after working for 2 years in Delhi, I think I remember landing in Singapore. And since we're looking at it from the gender perspective, I remember the second thing, I wonder what feels very different. I mean, obviously the city is very different compared to Delhi. But I remember thinking, oh, this comfortable sort of anonymity that you have on the streets, I said, this must be what guys enjoy sort of every day, everywhere in the world. And no one faces. You never have to worry about what you're wearing, what time of the night it is, how you're going to get home. It just was a very different sort of, by the time it sort of sunk in, and actually Hong Kong is very similar in that respect, and I love both cities for that you just have this complete sort of anonymity, which certainly after 2 years in Delhi was very refreshing.
Sure. And what about the peer set? Like, does it become more competitive because you're suddenly thrown into a sea of people with such diverse culture that you're not sure how people are responding to you and your ethnicity? Does that come in the way in any way at all, or does it become more cohesive, in fact?
Back, I think again, I think people from India are probably not unfamiliar sort of to most of the nationalities sort of I've mentioned that made up that mix. I mean, for the most part, people were sort of really welcoming. I remember there's this one partner who used to persist in talking to me very loudly and very slowly. And that was just a bit confusing for a few months. I'm sure he was deaf, or he thought I was. But enough, to be fair. I mean, there was no malice there. It was just really odd. And I once asked one of my colleagues, this Australian guys, to share a room with. I said, what's the deal? Why did he speak to you normally, but really slowly to me? And he was like, it might be time to tell him that English is your first language. He's like, or I can tell him if you are uncomfortable telling him. So, very small stuff like that. But for the most part, it was, like I said, people were most welcoming. And, it wasn't sort of as if working with an Indian lawyer was sort of new to any of them. I mean, people like Niloufer had already blazed the trail in the last decade. So it wasn't like, it was the first time they were seeing this odd creature in the offices.
Okay, super. And Niloufer, how about you? Indians are usually obsessed with leaving the country because they want a better life, in terms of experience, in terms of just quality of life. And here you are, you've chosen to come back to India, and that to Bombay City. So tell us about that.
Well, I'm a good Bawaji, and so my genes strongly lie in Bombay, despite my having had some dibble dabbles abroad.
Sure.
No, so I think for me it was a multiple of kind of personal and professional, and I am a strong believer in a way of kind of variety is the spice of life, and if you feel that you want to try something, you should kind of go for it. And for me, I think it's made me much more holistic and multidisciplinary in the way that kind of I advise now. So I'm really glad that I did it. I made a lot of friends when I was in the UK, professional friends and personal friends. And moving back, it's been a great experience. As I said, I wasn't new. You adapt in. I think as human beings, we're remarkably adaptable. It's normally the mental side of it that holds us back more. I think when we're thrown into it, we just adapt and you kind of learn to walk, so to speak, right? And that's what it was for me. I came back, I joined Amarchand, the management there were very supportive. I had a good team. So of course there are differences in, cities and cultures and working environments, but it's not anything that you kind of don't overcome over a period of, 6-9 months. So yeah, I mean, that's broadly what it was for me.
And on the client side, did you feel like they treated you differently? Because there's often this belief system, right, that Indian clients are usually anyway more promoter driven. So
yeah.
Was that something that you had to deal with a little bit, like navigate your way around?
Yes, it takes a little bit of time, I think, for people to kind of, first of all, figure out who you are. Second of all, what you do. Third of all, to figure out that I had a slightly weird accent. So was I an English lawyer? Was I actually an Indian lawyer, right? Which one was I? So it takes a little bit of time to adapt, I think, for them after, on that. But once they kind of get used to you and you've been working with them, then it's fine.
Sure. Okay. Super.
Do you want to talk about why you actually came back, Niloufer? Because it is a good point that what Tanisha mentioned. I know you said variety, spice, life, but what are the kind of trigger points that made you try coming back to Mumbai? Because I know when I did the move, when I came from London, I'd spent my whole life in London to Mumbai. Yeah. Everyone I met was like, what are you guys doing? Like, it's crazy. Like, why would you come to Mumbai of all places? And most people didn't fathom the logic behind it. So.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, most people don't. And I remember when I was moving back, a lot of people saying to me, why are you coming back? And I think just somewhere in my gut at that point, I felt that there would be more action in Asia. And at that time also there was a phrase, because it was kind of 2008, 2009. And the phrase kind of went Dubai, Mumbai, Shanghai, or goodbye. So the concept was that, trade, business activity, everything's kind of moving east. Not to say that it wasn't all happening in Europe, but Europe's and the UK is much more structured. It's much more, the economies are at different stages of development, right? So in that sense, I think Asia is much more exciting to be in. And when I thought about that, despite the fact that my surname is Lam, I am not Chinese, I don't speak Mandarin, so that's not an option really. I mean, of course, Hong Kong and Singapore, you don't need to, but I just felt that, it was a good opportunity to explore, being back home.
Mm. And a bit more about that move, because obviously you'd done well in the UK, when you were at law firm, you had your in-house stint as well. But going from there, I mean, I think Pallavi probably had an easier move. Like I said, getting out of Delhi, going to an international firm in Singapore, relatively easier to start swimming straight away. But going from international to an Indian law firm, and a more traditional Indian law firm, how was that experience?
So I think, it's fine. I think, as I said, you just adapt. You figure out a different way of working, and you realize that, maybe some of the practices you had you took for granted weren't the way it kind of works, and then you adapt and change and do the best that one can in whichever firm one's in. I was very fortunate to be there. I think CAM's a great firm, and I was very fortunate to be there.
Is there anything they had to learn to adapt to deal with a foreign lawyer coming back in?
I think you'll have to ask them that.
Yeah. Okay. Right, a very lawyer answer. I want to pick up for the next question, pick up what Pallavi just mentioned as well, which was obviously she's slightly younger when she went abroad to A&O Singapore. So, but she said, for example, you'd been there earlier with international firms. She put this phrase of, blaze a trail, these trailblazers that had gone overseas, especially as kind of not just women, but Asian or Indian women working at international firms. But so did you have to deal with what she was mentioning about the partner that was speaking slowly and, in a different manner to her? Did you have to deal with some of those structural issues, when you were trying to build your career from scratch?
A little bit, I suppose. I mean, I probably wasn't very conscious of it at the time, if I'm honest. I was just the kind of person who, put my head down and just got on with it, right? And did the best job that one can. And, in hindsight, probably, there are things we dealt with. I think it's important to have somebody to mentor you in organizations, right, and to guide you. But I had a great time at Linklaters. It was loads of fun, great learning, great training, great deal experience, all of it.
Okay, super. I'm going to come back to you, Pallavi, on the next question. Obviously, both of you have worked not just in Indian law firms, but international ones as well. So from your own personal journeys and experiences, not just as women developing careers, but as was mentioned before, as Indian women in international firms, what are the lessons you think the industry could take when it comes to the development and advancement of women within their legal careers?
So,
Pallavi, I'll go to Pallavi first on that.
Okay. So obviously, I honestly can't comment on the sort of Indian side of things because, let's be perfectly honest, there was no conversation around diversity or inclusion 15, 16 years ago, either in India or overseas. So when I left the country, the conversation didn't exist. So my sort of entire sort of experience around that has been largely at international law firms. It's such a broad base. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is if you're talking about taking a lesson away is don't make assumptions about the women. Don't make assumptions about what makes them happy, what they want to do, why they want to do it. I think even in the early years of the diversity conversations, I remember some of the leadership sort of programs and stuff I attended as a senior associate. They were so geared to how do we fix the women. It was all about, women aren't networking enough. Women should be getting out there, and this is what you could do more of, and this is what you could do less of. It felt a lot like the conversations around, the women are broken, we need to fix them, so they stay at law firms. I think thankfully a lot of that has changed in the last sort of 5-6 years. There's been a much sort of greater focus and lens at all international organizations on fixing the profession or the structures, the organizations, rather than sort of, making assumptions like women aren't in the profession because they want to have babies. Women aren't in the profession because, they don't like networking. Women aren't sort of meeting clients because they don't like staying out late for drinks. So I'd say the first thing is if you've sort of got a sort of senior woman in your team who's maybe coming up for partnership or is being groomed to even senior associate to go through the ranks, is probably not to make a whole bunch of assumptions on what her life choices and goals are. As you wouldn't about the guys, right? You just go with the flow and sort of try and give them the best mentoring and support you could. And, some of them may stay and some of them may leave. There will still be those personal choices along the way, but it helps to sort of remove that lens of sort of judgment. And, sort of thinking you're trying to cater to something that you might actually not be catering to because that might not be what the other person wants at all.
Yeah,
not sure that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point because, it's quite easy, especially if you're trying to be cautious about it, to just have this whole bunch of assumptions and think, okay, this is how we do it, and never actually ask, the recipients of, the structural programs. So they're probably not enough research or work back then to just ask honestly, what do you got? What do you want, women? What do you want within your careers? What would help? And do the kind of PC route.
The best partners I've worked with is sort of the senior associate who are actually credited as sort of being mentors, actually asked me the question. They said, what do you want? Do you want to stay in private practice? Do you want to be a partner? And when I said, yes, I do want to actually be a partner. And I was like, why would you even ask? Like, why do you think anyone works 18 hours a day if they don't want to be a partner? They're like, well, you've never said, so we thought we should ask. And I was like, oh, that's a valid point. Ask the question, what does the person And I think recognize that no matter what you do, whatever initiatives you put in place, there will always be women who leave the profession, and that's a choice, just as there will always be men who leave the profession. It doesn't mean the initiatives aren't worthwhile or the women aren't worthwhile or the diversity isn't worthwhile. If the whole conversation is about choices, then it's about giving people the choice to leave or stay. And it's worth giving them those choices for the talent you do retain in the building.
That's great feedback, I think, actually. And then Niloufer, same question to you in terms of, from your experiences, I'll just throw out, as a woman and as an Indian, within domestic and international firms, what are the lessons that industry can take when it comes to the whole development side and advancement of women within their legal careers?
So, I actually, it's very interesting. I actually think generally Indian law firms are way ahead of this, and compared to some of the, at least what I experienced in the UK, and maybe it's a function of time as well, and when it was. When I was in the UK, there really wasn't much discussion about it at all, right? Nobody ever had a discussion, whether it's as a woman or an Indian woman, about how you want your career to develop, what are your goals. I mean, you would have a kind of technical annual assessment, but the softer side of how things are going to grow, it just wasn't there. I think, my experience in India is that I think there's no issue with any of it. And my experience was that generally people are very open about it. But the only thing is that the communication, I think, to just take off on what Pallavi was saying, is that the communication needs to be there constantly to understand what each person's requirements and goals might be. And that's not obvious, right? We may think we know what somebody wants, but actually we don't. And similarly, if the person, it's also, I think, incumbent upon them to have the discussion, right? And ask whoever their senior is for that discussion, right? And depending on the person, perhaps maybe they'll give you lip service, maybe they'll be genuine in terms of what they're going to try and do. But I think the first stepping point is to actually understand what people's requirements and goals and desires are. And that's especially because, as Pallavi was saying, there's such a huge percentage of women that are basically coming through, right, from law school, right? And it goes to your point, I think maybe that you were talking about earlier, as to actually in India, I think generally women do get to a much higher level, and there's a higher retention. It's not that there's not, but maybe it could be more.
If I may interject here, I think also, while it's important to ask women, I think as women, we also shy away from saying what works for us and what doesn't. Because the minute you tell somebody that, hey, you know what, this conference call at this time may not work for me, we're very worried about, oh my God, are they going to perceive me as, less competent, less dedicated? So I think we also shy away from, telling people very openly what's okay and what's not okay. And I think that's also one of the major reasons why we see a lot of the drop off in the 8 to 12 year PQE typically, because that is when women want to start focusing on, a lot of their personal goals in that sense, whether it's getting married, whether it's starting families. And we're so apologetic about, asking for these things, right? So I don't know if that has any role to play. I mean, have the both of you put yourselves out there, put your needs out there and said, hey, you know what, this is what I need. And has it been well received?
I've not done it probably enough, to be honest. And it's sometimes been an issue, particularly where, when I've had children and stuff. But I think the main thing is to sit down with whoever the senior is and just discuss, okay, look, this is what I'm trying to do. And how would you feel about it? And how should we work it out? So that basically within the team, I think the time at which you're about to join a call or need to join a call is not the time to have it, right? Because generally things are rushed around that time. But if you're setting the expectations up front and you agree a framework, then I think, everybody is a husband, a father, a mother, a sister. I mean, everybody's human, right? So I think, at the senior level, I feel it's part of my duty also to try and nurture that and try and accommodate people as much as we can, right? Because everybody needs to juggle their work and their home life, whatever it is. Not just women, also men for various reasons as well, right?
I've become quite direct about it in the last sort of 6-7 years, but it certainly took me time to get there. So the same partner who sort of asked me, what do you want? Do you want to be a partner? And I said, why would you ask? Because I thought it was stunningly obvious. He's like, well, because you've never said in any appraisal, you just sit there like a good girl and you take notes and you sort of, you go away and you do a good job, but he's like, you've never actually said the words, I want to be a partner. He was like, I've got guys in the team who I think are less talented, beating down my door every day, asking me what their sort of career trajectory looks like.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize you needed to say the words, but I was like, that kind of makes sense, right? In a system where, as we all know, sort of squeaky wheel gets the oil because time, resource, sort of bandwidth, everything is constrained. I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. That possibly people are sort of, ignoring what I want because I'm not taking enough sort of, ownership of that. I think that being said, in the last sort of 6-7 years, I've been quite direct about when something does or does not sort of work for me. It's been a journey getting there. It doesn't always feel comfortable. It often feels like a grain of something sort of stuck in your shoe when you need to sort of step over that and articulate. But I think it's a work in progress. But I've been better, I think.
Super. Okay.
Yeah, I think that comes across more as a kind of like a gender issue, because I think research shows, and we've seen it even on the programs, that women are much more hesitant of just asking and being a bit more bolder in terms, most women in terms of what they want and where they want to go. And men, even if they're less talented, are much more aggressive about, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want this, I want this, and more kind of, bold about it and outlandish, where, women, aren't right, doing that enough, and where you still have a patriarchal system, unfortunately, that's kind of the requirement.
Yeah, I don't think I ever asked for it. Now that Pallavi's saying it, I'm thinking about it. I don't think I ever asked for it. I just assumed that they probably knew that I wanted it.
Yeah.
And if this partner had not pointed out to me, and he was sort of a mentor at different points in my career, I would never have asked. And I realized that it would have been stupid because given how sort of class sizes of partners had shrunk in the years after the global financial crisis, I think him saying it just made me realize it's stupid. You can't just sit there and expect, like, if the class sizes are now half of what they were pre sort of 2008, you can't just sit there and hope that, somebody will say, oh, what a good girl, we should give her sort of partnership as a reward. It just doesn't work that way.
So are those lessons that you've now taken on board and kind of imbibed with, within your organizations that you work with? And, we'll move on to the next point around mentoring. That have you kind of learned that lesson and now able to help others in terms of, especially women, within the teams you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I've generally, regardless of whether it's women or men, I've always tried to say that, look, whatever issues you have, whatever you want, come talk about it. I think it's incumbent on people to come and talk about it. I think also people generally make assumptions around things, maybe for, whatever those may be. And so I think generally that's my approach, that, and everybody needs that, right? But regardless, for their career, whether it's informal or during the formal assessment, whenever it may be.
Yeah, and that the whole point, I think in the prep run, we mentioned, the point came up that we cannot be bystanders in our own careers, so just based on what you were just mentioning, again, back to both of you, what active steps, can you recommend that young people take, to ask the right questions, self-evaluate, and find mentors, who not only guide, but also give them a realistic picture, of, where they are in their careers and where they could get to. So Niloufer, just build on what you're doing with your teams, at the moment.
So I think that you have to have the kind of short-term goals and the long-term goals, right? And the short-term goals have to be, whether they may be technical, they may be, different things. And the long-term goals is kind of where they want to be in 5 years, 10 years, etc. And I think that, that's that constant kind of just discussion has to happen. I think people need to be thinking about what it is they like to do work-wise, which practice area. They need to think about, their technical expertise as well. All of these things are things that they need to do. Sometimes what I find is that people want to get to a certain level, but they have to actually do the work to get to that level. Law is a hard profession, much harder than I thought it would be, actually, when I started, to be honest. I think you have to take each step depending on what level somebody's at to kind of figure out what the next stage is and what the ultimate goals are. And sometimes people won't know that also at the junior level, right? And they can't be expected to. But I think it's good to just reflect, maybe every 18 months or something like that, as to where you're at and what you want to be doing.
And how much should they be taking those proactive steps themselves versus having, the firm or the corporate having structures in place to help them?
Some of the stuff is their own personal ambition, right? So it's very hard for a firm to kind of state what that is. They may have, you can have the discussions around it, the firm can facilitate the opportunities, but I think ultimately it's up to the person to think about it and then discuss it internally and take it forward after that as well, and come back for feedback if they're not sure about something.
Yeah, great. And Pallavi, over to you, that same question in terms of that whole point around we cannot be bystanders in our own careers. So, you mentioned that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, you've become more proactive in asking for feedback and telling your seniors where you want to get to. So, what active steps can you recommend the next gen take with regards to developing their own careers?
Honestly, everything, to be honest, because I don't think it's and I know I wrote that sort of in that letter to myself, but it wasn't really as much in the context of sort of seeking promotions or sort of progression. I mean, all the example I gave for myself was that it's more about just ownership of sort of where you see your practice going. This is a profession, as Niloufer says, it's a hard profession. It takes a lot out of you in terms of the number of hours, the sheer stamina that's needed, the sheer resilience that's needed to, sometimes not lose your temper, because you're tired, you're sort of dealing with sort of difficult situations. It's a profession that requires a lot of resilience. If you don't constantly work at finding things that engage you, that keep you happy, or finding sort of avenues within that, it could be as simple as sort of broadening your practice area. So maybe you started as sort of equity capital markets, and then you did debt, and then you did restructuring, and then you did something else. If you're not finding sort of new ways to keep yourself engaged, if you're not sort of trying to ask for more complex or interesting work, it's very easy to sort of stagnate and lose some of your enthusiasm for the profession. So I think if you want to keep that fire stoked, and if you see it as a marathon, not a sprint, then that's a constant sort of, I think, investment you have to make in terms of seeking out better, more interesting, more diversified. And then you find other things in a professional context that interest you. It might be diversity and inclusion, it might be mentoring, it might be, just taking someone who needs it a bit under your wing. But that purpose is sort of remaining actively engaged as opposed to sitting at your desk and having someone give you work and then you're just sort of, doing, in my universe, 15 MTN programs a year. That's the difference. So you can be the person who does 15 MTN programs, and yes, you learn a lot and you will be a practitioner, versus you can be the person who tries to take every bit you can from the profession. It has a lot to give. It has a lot to take from you, but it also has a lot to give. So that is the difference between being a bystander and not, in my view.
If you could say, okay, there's a percentage of how much, your employer should, give you support, mentoring, etc., versus how much you're in charge of driving your career. I mean, where do you think the kind of balance really lies?
It's on you, to be honest. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would quit a firm that didn't have a mentoring or sort of diversity strategy. So, I've always sort of worked with organizations that do value that. But I think in terms of how you apply it to yourself, ultimately the buck stops with you. It's your career. It's going to span you for the better part of sort of 20, 30 years, however long you choose to do it. Even when firms have frameworks in place, how you take advantage of them, how you sort of use them to get more out of the system, how you use them to grow. That's kind of on you, I think, as an individual. And I think the younger you start that process, the better it is. So like I said, whether it is sort of making sure, if people are doing it for you anyway, great. Let's take the example of sort of mentoring, right? I remember a partner once said, mentoring is sort of luck of the draw. If you're very lucky, you'll find a couple of good mentors. For whatever reason, they'll take an interest in you, they'll groom you, they'll teach you. And in my case, for example, those people are now retired from the profession, remain very good friends. That will be the journey you sort of make with them. If you're unlucky, you won't find that person. And that's again the luck of the draw, right? It just might be that in your practice area or your immediate team, there isn't anyone who's interested. Does that mean you should sort of give up and let your career fall by the wayside? Absolutely not. Equally, as this partner once said to me, finding a mentor or a single role model isn't easy. I think almost no one manages. If you manage that, you're in a minuscule sort of minority where you can find this one person who you look up to in sort of all respects. I think the most people can hope for is to look at a variety of people you work with and try and take a few qualities from each of them. You may take someone's work ethic, you may take someone's sort of client handling skills, you may take a third person's attitude to gender or diversity or inclusivity. And you try and work with that to see what you can get out of that and what fits your personality. I think getting a single mentor to sort of see you through, that's a pretty tough ask in any profession.
Yeah, I think
there's a lesser pressure on that one mentor, right? Whether it's time-wise, commitment-wise, just works better. Niloufer, you were saying something.
No, I agree with everything that Pallavi said, and I think that it has to come from within someone, and I think it's something that people reflect on every few months, a year. It's not something they should be thinking about all the time. It's just that it's good to take stock, right? Maybe every 6 months and think about, okay, this is what I've been doing. How has this worked for me? Should I be doing something different? Who do I need to ask about this? And I think also there's a danger with firms that firms can have a lot of policies, but if they're not implemented, it's not really going to be very effective, right? So I think there's a danger also, in India, people announcing a lot of policies, but how much of that is actually getting executed? And the other challenge is that, people at the senior level are very busy, right? And clients are very demanding. So as a junior person, I think my guidance would be basically that, pick a time with the person that you want to mentor you, try and get them at a good time, fix a time with them, have your list of questions and points that you want to discuss with them ready. Don't just go in off the hoof and start discussing it, right? Think about what you want to discuss with them, and because you want to maximize your time with that person as well, right? If a person has the benefit of 20 or 30 years, you want to get the most out of that half an hour that you have with them, right? Also, I think to just take off on what Pallavi was saying, which I entirely agree with, is that you may be bored with a particular practice area. You may want to do different things within the practice area. You may also want to do other things, to just have a more holistic experience, right? Whether it's doing NGO work, whether doing policy work, writing an article, I don't know, doing a hobby. It could be many, many different things, right? I think the other thing with the profession is that it can just be all encompassing sometimes. And I think it's important also for us to try and make that time for whatever our personal, whatever that personal interest is that we have. So that's another thing.
Yeah, great tips. Amazing tips for the next gen, actually. And obviously that comes with wisdom and experience that you kind of reflect back thinking, I wish I'd done this. And the more we can transfer that to the next gen, the better.
Super. Thank you both. This brings us to the end of this segment. And we'll now move on to the next one, which is called the Interrogation Round. We're expecting you to give us very racy, fast-paced, slightly thoughtless answers. So are we ready for that?
Ready and waiting.
Okay. You want to take a sip of something? You both are free to. And then we can plunge into this.
Well, Manish, I'd like to see what comes up when you say racy.
All right, let's start. So I'll do the first 5 questions. I'll start with you, Pallavi, and Niloufer, then we'll move to you with the same set of 5 questions, all right? All right, Pallavi, are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, let's do this. If you woke up as a man, you would dash.
Be horrified at having to give up my wardrobe.
Okay. What would you say to 18-year-old Pallavi?
For God's sake, get a hobby. It took me another 10 years to work that one out.
Wow.
Find something to do.
Okay. One tip you would give to employers when it comes to delivering male-female equality at leadership or boardroom levels?
Same as what I said earlier, which is, you just need to make the effort and you need to keep making it. I think it's going to be a slow, hard slog. We're correcting sort of decades of entrenched behavior. So there are not going to be any results overnight, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth it. Women leaving the profession doesn't mean isn't worth it. You just have to keep slogging away. And some years the numbers are going to look better, some years they're going to look worse, and you're not going to get there overnight.
Sure. Okay. One subject in law school that you really detested and why?
I mean, transfer of property. And I ended up being a finance lawyer, but I mean, why? I mean, who likes transfer property? Who in their right mind says I enjoy answer a problem.
I completely agree with you.
Pallavi, I'm with you on that one. That was mine as well.
Me
That would be mine.
If
Absolutely.
you go to the gym and say I like burpees or something, I just want to say that.
Okay.
I think we're both finance lawyers.
Okay. How would your friends and family describe you in 3 words, Pallavi?
Oh God. Hope they'd say I'm funny. I think they certainly sound a bit fierce.
Okay.
You're struggling here. Can we go with 2 words?
No problem.
Don't worry, I'll make up for hers because I had a Zoom party last night. They gave me all of the ones to me.
Oh, nice. Okay. Pallavi, we did notice how you tried to tone down the fierce one by adding the bit there. Very strategic move. Well done, you. Okay. Over to you, Niloufer.
Biased in my favor.
Absolutely. Okay, Niloufer. Now your turn. If you woke up as a man, you would.
Miss wearing a skirt.
Okay.
You could. There's no stopping you.
True. But maybe I'd wear it less often as a man.
Maybe when you'd visit Scotland once a year or something.
Right.
Love them. Okay. What would you say to 18-year-old Niloufer?
Have fun. Be strategic on your career, and don't follow the herd.
Oh, nice. Okay. One tip you would give to employers when it comes to delivering the male-female equality at leadership or boardroom level?
I think awareness and grooming as well,
Okay.
which takes a couple of years, can take a few years.
Sure. Okay. One subject in law school that you really detested and why?
Same, land law.
Land.
Hated it. Yeah.
Okay. How would your friends and family describe you in 3 words, Niloufer?
So I had a Zoom party last night that I attended for an hour with a glass of wine. And so I asked them this question, that how would you describe? So these are the answers that they've kind of said. So they've said fun, competent, bossy, superwoman, clever, and devoted.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. All right.
I want your friends and family.
Sorry?
Your friends and family.
Pallavi saying she wants your friends and family.
Oh, okay. Maybe they hadn't drunk enough by the time they gave the answers.
Okay, Vikas, over to you.
Cool. Niloufer, if you were given the chance to read people's minds, who are the first 3 people you'd want to meet with?
If I could read their minds. Beethoven, because he wrote music and he was deaf, so I thought that's quite interesting. Rohington Nariman in the Supreme Court, and my children's minds. That would help. On many occasions.
Why did your husband not make it to this list, Niloufer?
Because I can already read his mind, right? No, I'm just joking. I didn't think about it, actually.
Okay, super.
What's the longest period of time you've stayed away from a laptop or phone?
Me? Well, amazingly, 7 days.
You were non-stop on it, so.
7 days. Aren't you impressed?
What? Was it under repair?
So I basically did a long time ago when I was a bit younger. I did a trek to Kilimanjaro. I trekked up Kilimanjaro, and that's a 7-day trek. And of course, there's no cell phone reception. So yeah, no cell phone for 7 days. It was lovely.
All right. Anisha, and how you know what you need to do next?
Absolutely.
What's your argument style on the personal front? Assertive, aggressive, passive, or something else?
Assertive.
All right. How much was your first salary and what did you do with it?
I think my first salary was about 15,000 and I think I spent it.
Buying what?
Oh, I mean, everything, right? I had to pay. So I was a young lawyer and I was in London. I had to pay rent, groceries, all of that stuff. I was kind of self-sufficient. So from that perspective.
Yeah. And a movie and a book you highly recommend?
A movie I'm not sure about. A book. So I really enjoyed reading with my daughter a couple of months ago this book called Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, and I mention it because of the topic and the theme that we've got, and it's basically for young girls, and it's different stories about interesting women throughout time. So it could be Mother Teresa, just different women, and that was really great. It could be tennis stars, everybody.
It is a great book. I mean, you should. I don't know if you spoke about your grandmother, but you could do that with them. Pallavi, over to you. If you were given the chance to read people's minds, who are the first 3 people you would want to meet with?
Yeah, so obviously I've been thinking about that since Niloufer answered, and I can't come up with one other than my husband. Everyone else, I probably hate to be able to read minds. I think it would just kill conversation. I prefer to just operate in oblivion.
Ignorance is bliss. Okay, what's the longest period of time you've stayed away from a laptop or phone?
6 or 7 hours whenever I sleep.
Oh my God.
As expected.
All right. What's your argument style on the personal front? Assertive, aggressive, or passive?
Assertive, obviously. Does anyone say aggressive or passive?
What would your husband say to that one?
Obviously assertive.
How much was your first salary and what did you do with it?
It was actually quite high for the time in India. It was about $1 lakh. I bought my mom a Ganesha for her collection because she likes them. And then I didn't think I had time to spend any of the rest of it because I was too busy working. I think I just bought
And a movie and a book you highly recommend?
Book would be Rohinton Misri's A Fine Balance. I really love that book and I sort of keep going back to it over the years. Movie, to be honest, too many. I mean, if I need a laugh, it's still probably Delhi Belly.
Oh, I was talking about that last night with my brother-in-law.
So every few years I'll just watch that. I laugh as much as I've watched it the first time. So that's probably still my favorite.
Yeah.
Super. Okay. Now back to you, Niloufer. Tell us about a time that either your name was mispronounced or your nationality was wrongly assumed.
So when I was in the UK, sometimes when I would pick up the phone or call to speak to somebody, my name constantly got translated into Melissa or Jennifer. So that would happen a lot.
Jennifer.
Melissa or Jennifer.
How is that even possible? Niloufer, Melissa, Jennifer.
Jennifer is completely
Niloufer, Jennifer. Where did Melissa come?
I don't know, but it used to happen quite a bit.
Wow. Okay. All right. Tell us one thing that you're terrible at doing. It could be a chore or an activity.
Ironing.
Ironing.
Yeah, and I really don't like it either.
Okay. So have you been missing your Iron Man during this lockdown?
Sort of, yeah. But luckily not wearing too much other than, healthy clothes, so it's fine.
So it's fine. Okay. Tell us about a funny or an embarrassing moment that you've had either with a client or a team member thus far.
Gosh, I can't think of one.
It's okay. No pressure. We can move on to the next question. Would you rather have the ability to switch off your emotions, like switch them on and off? Or would you rather be able to grasp any written material by just glancing over the pages?
I think glancing over the materials.
Glancing.
I'd like to keep my emotions.
Oh, okay, great. What instantly lights you up or brings a smile to your face, Niloufer?
Cuddles with my kids.
So cute. Okay. What would you like to be remembered as?
Professionally or personally?
Everything, collectively.
Collectively, okay. I think somebody who tried to create something and tried to help people and make a difference.
Okay, super. Last question for you, Niloufer. One thing this pandemic has taught you?
I think be grateful. Hugely.
Super. All right. Pallavi, over to you. A time that your name was either misspelled or mispronounced, or your nationality was wrongly assumed.
I get Valerie all the time. I'll have clients call me back and be like, Val, I'm like, it's Pallavi. And they'll be like, oh, it's you. My PA said Valerie. That's the constant. I've given up correcting it.
And also the surname, right? Your matrimonial surname.
Oh, that all the time. So it's like, are you married to a Spanish man? Are you married to an Italian man? I've given up answering that. And I'm like, no, actually, just Maharashtra in India. They're like, oh, okay.
How do you pronounce it? Because I think it's Aney, right?
It's Aney. That's right, with the n sound.
You know what will be a fun moment to just take away from you and go to Niloufer and get her to say Aney right now. Niloufer, you want to try?
Niloufer to embrace Mumbai. Come on.
Aney.
No.
No.
Okay, full marks for trying, Niloufer. We'll stop right here.
My husband kept correcting me for about 1.5 years after we got married. So it takes practice.
Yeah, you've mastered it quite well, Pallavi. You say it like an absolute...
I've been well taught.
Like a pro.
Like a son of the soil, if you will.
Daughter of the soil.
Daughter of the soil, right. Okay. Your next question then, Pallavi. Tell us about one thing that you are terrible at doing. It could be a chore or an activity.
Oh, so many things. I can't sing to save my life. I mean, it just literally makes people laugh because I carry a tune so badly. They're like, how do you hear that? How does it translate into that? Is a question I get constantly from my friends.
Okay, fine. Tell us about a funny or an embarrassing story, either with a client or a team member, if you have one.
Like just a few days ago, because everyone in Singapore has to wear masks, it's mandatory. And so I got in the lift at level 1 with this guy who I thought was in our HR team. And I sort of walked the whole way ranting to him about COVID policies and numbers in offices, and then I got off at level 9, which is the ANO office, and he didn't. So I was a little puzzled because I thought he sat on our floor, and we also have level 10. And I walked to my room, and as I walked there, I just suddenly realized he wasn't the guy I was thinking of. So he was very polite. He nodded through the entire conversation, and he was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I have no idea which organization.
Wow.
There was a guy who's convinced as a lunatic on level 9. Random strangers about COVID policies.
Then that's when you can pretend to be Valerie.
Yes.
He was Valerie. Ranted at you for 9 whole floors.
Unbelievable. Okay, well done. All right. Would you rather have the ability to switch your emotions on and off? Or would you rather that you grasp any written material by just glancing over the pages?
Same as Nilofer. I'd rather take the written material. I'm okay with inflicting my emotions on people.
Okay. All right. What instantly lights you up, Pallavi, or brings like a smile to your face?
My dog. That's easy.
What's your dog called?
Ladu.
Ladu.
He's definitely got a son of the soil name.
Nice. Okay. What would you like to be remembered as?
Kind. I think above all, I'd like to be remembered as someone who at least tried to be kind, even if they didn't sort of always succeed, both professionally and personally.
Wonderful. And the last one thing the pandemic has taught you, Pallavi.
To never ever put off a vacation plan again.
Well said.
Choices on the bucket list.
Touché.
We'll do it next year. This is when it's less busy. I'm never ever putting off a vacation plan again.
So true. I think that's probably gone through all our minds at some point. It's going to be 1.5 years to just being stuck wherever we are. So, all right. Well done, ladies. That brings us to the end of this segment. We're now moving on to the last segment of the show. We have about 5 minutes assigned for this. We'd like for you each to talk about a memory or show us a thing which you hold very dearly and sort of keep going back to, in the course of your professional life. So, Niloufer, you want to start off first?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I have a slight lawyer gene in me. So there are a few lawyers in my family, and sometimes I reflect on, what they would have done in certain situations and how they would have dealt with it. So I suppose that's a nice memory for me to have, or a nice, that's the way I approach it sometimes.
It's interesting that you say it because we know that your grandmother or great-grandmother, I'm not sure, was...
My grandmother.
Your grandmother
Yeah.
was the first woman lawyer who was allowed to argue before the Bombay High Court.
Yes, that's right. So she was many firsts. So there's some very big shoes there. But yeah, she was also like the first female professor at GLC, and I think you were at GLC, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and she was also a sheriff of Bombay and a couple of other things as well alongside that. And she was basically very active in the main thing was she was very active in the suffragette movement in India. So very lobbied and rallied a lot to get women's vote.
Fantastic.
So that's really something that I find humbling.
Okay, wonderful. And how about you, Pallavi? Do you have something to show us?
So this thing, so I had this, I'm not sure if it's visible. It's a little Ganesh my grandmother gave me when I went to law school in Bangalore. So it sort of stayed 5 years with me in law school. It's been on sort of every desk I've ever worked at. So I'm sort of really attached to that. It was from her little home temple. So it's traveled countries, cities, offices, and it stays.
Imagine if the Ganesha could talk. There'd be so many tales he'd be telling us, right?
I think the Ganesha would have been made to sign an NDA.
Nice, very nice. Okay, and sorry, you were saying something else, Pallavi?
No, I think the other thing is you can't see it, but behind me is a little board on which I've sort of put up all the cards sort of team members who've left over the years have given me. They're just farewell cards, goodbye notes. That's something that's very sort of dear to me because it's sort of a bit of shared memories from everyone. So I quite sort of like revisiting that sometimes.
How nice. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you, Niloufer. It's been an absolute pleasure. And honestly, like my whatever non-existent jawline really hurts right now because this has been quite a laughter riot. So thanks so much for sharing so openly, agreeing to do this with us. We've really had fun and we hope you have too.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks, Vikas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye. Have a
Thanks.
great evening.
Thanks,
Thanks
Pallavi.
everyone for watching. Bye.